Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
It really is a pleasure for me to introduce our speaker this morning. She is really a neat lady and a dynamite speaker, and without further ado, Sister B.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bea, and I am a grateful alcoholic. Delighted to see you, and I want to thank the committee for inviting me. I think it was over a year ago, and so I had you firmly on my calendar and been dying to get here and to know what it felt like and looked like, and now I know. When I come to a new place, and this is a new place for me to be, I always do instant orphan, and I know none of you would identify with that. And so I was very delighted when I walked into the lobby yesterday and met a lady called Babs. I hope you're here somewhere, Babs, from my home meeting. I would imagine she's taking notes so that she can tell everybody in my home meeting how wonderful or how not wonderful I am. But anyway, I'm delighted she's here, and I'm also delighted that I had dinner last night with Clancy, and we didn't fight. And also thrilled to see Johnny and Karen, her real close people in my life. And a few minutes ago, I met a young fellow from Brea. His name is Chris. And he grew up there, and he knows lots of people I know, so that makes me feel like I fit. And the reason I say all that is because I never was anywhere where I fitted in my whole life. And also another group of people I met last night were a group of wild women from Sacramento who I spent a night with there some time back, and we had wonderful fun and laughs and enjoyed ourselves, and I was wondering how I'd ever meet them again, and I met them last night. So this is a marvelous place to be. It always amazes me because I think of a Sunday morning, and I think, we should all be in church by right, but this is just grand, and I feel that our God gets so tired of the seriousness of what might be happening in some of those places, and he comes here to Alcoholics Anonymous to have a bit of fun. And that's what I would like to do this morning. I would like to have a little bit of fun with you. And speaking about my God, if she were to ask me, well, there are some people who wouldn't appreciate that, but however, if she were to ask me where I'd want to be right now, I'd say just right here. This is just fitting nicely for me. But what I came all the way from Orange County to tell you is that everything in my life was wonderful until I was 2. And when I was 2, it just seemed that my whole world fell apart. And my whole world, as I knew it at 2, and as I often know it now, is that I'm supposed to be somewhere in the center with the lights on me, like I am now. And what happened to me when I was 2 was that my little sister was born, and nobody asked my permission. I will never understand why my parents didn't have this conference with me and ask me, was it okay for her to come into the world and take my place, which was the center. And that seems to have been happening to me for a lot of years after that. And then my parents had children. They had a baby every single year, being Irish and Catholic. And they ended up with 5 of us. And every time a new child was born into the family, it seemed like I was pushed out of my rightful spot, which was exactly the center. And while I went through the motions of belonging and doing all the things that you're supposed to do as the oldest of a family, I never really felt like I fitted or I belonged. And when I was at the ripe age of 8, my father left for work one day, and he never returned because he was killed in an accident. And I understand today that that had a traumatic effect on the way I was to be afterwards, because I didn't know how to do grief or mourning or loss or being separate from a family member like that. She aside, and she said to me, "Bea, I want you to help me to raise these children." And I can recall exactly what I did. I put away my dolls and all my playthings, and I started about this great task of growing up, which has not occurred for me yet. And it was a mighty task. And my mom was a school teacher, and she believed that it taught us everything she knew about everything she knew that we would be successful. And definitely we would not be widows at 32 like she was and not know what to do next. And she taught me all she knew about cleaning and cooking and babysitting, and she even taught me how to do school teachery things when I was at a very young age. In fact, my mom, although she didn't know this, she prepared me to become, as it says in our book somewhere around the page 60s, she prepared me to become a victim of the delusion that I could wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only I would manage well. And I was trained to manage well. And when I got into my teenage years, I did what most people do in those years. I started thinking about what I would want to be doing with the rest of my life. And what I decided to do was to become a saint. And I was very offended in Alcoholics Anonymous, like it was read, like Fran was reading this morning, when she read out of chapter 5 and she said, "We are not saints." And that really hurt my feelings for a long time in the program, as did many other things in the program. And what I did in trying to become a saint, because I didn't know any other way then, was I became a Catholic nun. And what I want to tell you now is that I've been a Catholic nun for 41 years and 2 months. And for those of you who have a resentment against somebody like me, I'll leave a space here and you might like to leave. Because usually in an audience this large, there's usually about 2 or 3 people who don't like people like me. And they don't like people in churches, and they have lots of problems. But before I continue, I would like to tell you that I didn't do it to you. And that gets me off the hook. One of the great truisms that I found since I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is an extremely spiritual concept, I think, and that is that there are assholes every place. You know? I mean, really. There are some Presbyterian assholes and some Methodist assholes, and Baptist assholes, and Irish Catholic assholes. And I found a couple of Jewish assholes here and there. I'm not sure about Norwegian Lutheran assholes. I'd like to cover all my bases here. And in Orange County, where I come from, I have even found 1 or 2 in Alcoholics Anonymous. But, you know, people are people. And when I came to the program, I just carried on my shoulders, these are the shoulders I have, I carried the responsibility of the entire Catholic Church, you know, for all the aberrations that had happened through the ages, and I was so responsible. And one person said to me one day, "Bea, count yourself, you're not so many." And the things you learn in Alcoholics Anonymous, you couldn't get this wisdom anywhere that I know of. And anyway, I started into this nunny bunny business in 1950, and I loved it. I really did. It was a wonderful way to be, and it still is. It's marvelous. I was sharing at dinner last night with Clancy. When I get home from these conventions, they're always waiting for me. And they're dying to know what I heard, who I saw, what jokes I know, good ones and bad ones. And I get them all mixed up, so I have to play the tapes so that I'll get them. And they're just very into this thing called AA. It's wonderful. In fact, sometimes they come to a meeting with me, and when we have to go around the room and introduce ourselves, and they say, "My name is so-and-so, I wish I were an alcoholic." They just think I have a wonderful time, which I do. And so anyway, I started into this nunny business in 1950, and after a couple of years, you know, they took a look at me and they said, well, maybe she would be smart if we sent her on to finish her education. So they sent me over to England, to London, to the University of London,
And I finished my education there, and I became kind of smart and clever. Something happened in the in-between years, and I'm not sure. But anyway, I became a teacher. And in those years, I knew a little bit about everything. I knew a little bit about primary education, secondary education, college education, and I knew lots of methodology about how to train and teach children and their parents and anybody who would come to me for my wise advice. And I can remember it was just grand, and I loved this field. I loved this field of education. But an interesting thing happened to me, and that was, and I know that this wouldn't apply to anybody here, but I just need to tell you the truth about me. What happened to me that a voice would go off in my head very regularly, and strange, orphaned, lonely, separate, not belonging feelings would happen in my guts. And the voice in my head would say, if only they would shape up, I would feel better. And they could be anybody. They could be anybody with whom I was working, with whom I was living, the government, the school system. It just didn't matter. But I always had this idea, if I could get them to change, I know I would be better. And one day I came home from school, and on our bulletin board there was a letter from our major superiors back in Ireland. And in the letter they said, would any of you like to volunteer to go to Southern California, because we're opening a new place there? And since I knew I belonged in Hollywood anyway, I signed up, and I got picked. And I went back over to Ireland to do all my paperwork and all of that from England, where I had been teaching, and did all my stuff. And as I was leaving, my Major Superior General said to me, as she said goodbye to me, she said, "Sister, we are going to put you in charge." Now, I don't know if any of you relate to this, but I think that anybody who is a potential alcoholic, that music to our ears is that we're going to be in charge. In fact, this book that I see under here talks about this all the time. It talks about us dying to run the show, trying to do it all, do the lights, the ballet, just arranging everything to suit ourselves. And I was doing that kind of behavior long, long, long before I ever had a drink. And so I came to Southern California, and I was dressed up in those nunny clothes. You know what they used to look like, with long black serge, wool. Gosh, it was hot. And I arrived on the 16th of August 1964, and we had all this white starch around our heads. In fact, if you're ever interested in looking at a picture of what we used to be like, there's a picture still on the bottle of blue nun wine. Except she's wearing blue and we wore black, but the rest of us all the same. Didn't care much for that stuff. I was only used to drink that when I was really desperate, but anyway, it was better than nothing. And it never counted either, because it was called blue nun wine. So anyway, I can remember arriving in Southern California on the 16th of August, and the first thing I remember was it was awfully hot. It was very hot. And but I was going to be in charge. I was going to be the school principal, and I was going to be in charge of all the nunny bunnies who were with me. And we were going to start off this new school and this new convent, and I was their Mother Superior. And everything did work out very well for about 5 or 6 days. And after that, and Chris will know who this is, but I know he won't break anybody's anonymity. After that, I was to meet a man who was to be my arch enemy for many years afterwards, and he was known as the pastor. And for some reason now, and I will never know why, but he had the idea that he was in charge. Now, I don't know who told him that, but I didn't, and he thought he was in charge, and I knew that I was sent there to be in charge, and immediately we clashed. We had this immediate clash. And I set about planning his demise from the word go. And I wrote letters in my mind in the middle of the night, and I thought, well, I'll go to Los Angeles, and I'll meet with the cardinal, and I'll get him moved, and I'll tell him all this stuff. And I started thinking, if only he would shape up, I would really feel better. And he had strange ideas, he had just built this school. And I come from the north of Ireland, where we live in a lot of conflict. And we live like there. And he painted those doors on the school orange. And for those of you who know your history, you'll know that that was a terrible thing to do to somebody like me. And I'm sure he did it on purpose, and all of that. And we just didn't get along, basically. And then, life was getting really strenuous. I was in a new culture with new methods of education. The children seemed like they were much wilder than the kids that I'd been used to teaching on the east corner, northeast part of England, where they were kind of calm. These children were boisterous and loud and noisy, and it got hot, and the Santa Ana wind would blow, and they would start perspiring, and then they'd skate water all over each other, and then they would throw paper wads, and it got really hard to live. And I was hot, and it was awful. And one day this lady came to my office door and she said, "Sister, if you would like, we have a swimming pool." And she had heard that I liked to swim. And she said, "Why don't you have all the sisters come over and swim at our swimming pool this afternoon after school?" So I piled all these nunny bunnies into the station wagon, because all nunny bunnies had station wagons in those days. And some of you know what I'm talking about. And we all went over there to swim at her swimming pool, and we changed into our swimsuits and we swam. We had a lovely afternoon. And she came out to the side of the pool after the swimming was over, and she had a tray. And on the tray there was a large pitcher and some glasses. And on the top of the glasses there was salt. And some of you sound like you might know what was in the pitcher. But, they don't always know in other places what was in the pitcher. In London, for example, when you tell them that, they go, "Meh," goes over their heads. They don't know what it means. And my personal opinion is what I share here. And my personal opinion is that if you haven't had a margarita, maybe you don't belong here yet, but I'm not sure. That's a good thing to say. Margaritas were definitely the drug of my choice. And I will never forget that first gulp. I couldn't say a sip because I don't know how to sip. But when I took that first gulp, I can remember exactly how I felt. It went right down to the limits of my toenails. And I knew that I needed to have this for the rest of my life, because I worked too hard, I was under too much stress, I wasn't sleeping very well, I was in a strange culture, in a strange country, away from my family that I didn't care for very much anyhow, but I was away from everything that I held dear, and God knows, I needed to have this stuff. And I said to the lady before I left, "Could you please give us the recipe?" And she gave us the recipe, and I thought, well, there's nothing more charitable or kind than to whip up this recipe on a regular basis when I could get the ingredients for these nunny bunnies who worked so hard for me. And I want to say that I'm not one of the kind of alcoholics who was, sometimes I sponsor some alcoholic women who are very, they seem to be kind of calm. And, they're sort of easy does it from the word go. I am one of these alcoholics who's like the tornado that rushes through the world. That's the kind of an alcoholic I was. And I used to say to the nunny bunnies on a Friday afternoon sometimes before we would finish school, I would say, well, I think we'll change all the classrooms today. We'll change the second graders into the sixth grade. We'll change the first graders into the seventh grade. We'll change the third graders into the eighth grade. And we'd change desks and, bulletin boards and everything, all the equipment. And we'd push desks, and the children would throw water, and we'd throw paper, and we'd lose things, and we'd scream, and we'd sweat, and we'd fight. And that would go on. I love chaos. I love it. Oh, I'll tell you, I even love it now. Sometimes. when things are going kind of, sort of on an even keel, I think we call it Serenity in Alcoholics Anonymous, I would like to start something that'll move, get the adrenaline going. Any of you like to do that sort of stuff? Anyway, I love this kind of chaos. So when I would say to the Nunny Bunnies every once in a while, "Are you tired?" they'd say, "Oh, yes, we're very tired." They would be very tired because of the way I worked them. And so they loved it when I would say, "Well, let's celebrate this evening." And I can remember one day the pastor came over to visit us, and he didn't like coming over there very much because he would say to me, "Do you need anything?" And he would say that with his tongue in his cheek, because I would say, "Yes, we need a new piano, we need 10 more desks, or we need a new clock," things we didn't need at all. And he came over this one day and he said, "Do you need anything?" And I said, "Yes, we would like to have, please, a bottle of tequila." And his eyes lit up and he looked at me and he said, "Do you like that stuff?" And I said, "Yes, we do." And he went away and he came back within 5 minutes. And I always say this, and I say it very guardedly, but I say it anyway. I think he got this bottle of tequila that he brought back in the place where they manufactured it, which could have been the rectory where he lived. Now, I'm not sure, but it could have been there. And he brought it back and he said, he said, "We're having a little get-together next Sunday. We're having some of the priests in the area come over and we're having a barbecue. And if you girls would like to come over and join us, you're welcome to do that." And I thought, And so we decided to do that. So we went over there and we had the barbecue, and I found out some wonderful things over there, which was just like across the parking lot from where I lived. And what he had over there, he had some scotch, and he had vodka, and he had rum, and he had all kinds of wine. And then after dinner, he had this thing he called an after-dinner drink that he called Brandy Alexander's. And I thought that was just so cultured, just to slip down this lovely creamy stuff after you've had a little taste of everything else, And I thought, oh, I've got to get friends with him. In fact, I think somewhere in our literature it says that we seek lore companions. And I remember making a very conscious decision, although I didn't know really the language that I know today for this, but I remember making a real conscious decision that I was going to have to learn to get along with this person so that I could get what I needed to get as often as I needed to get it. And it was just unbelievable the effect that this alcohol had on me right from the word go. I was a very careful drinker. I watched my spots very, very well. One of my real wonderful spots for drinking was Estero Beach in Mexico, in Ensenada. Maybe I drank with some of you there and I didn't even know. And maybe you didn't even know either. But there was this man who lived in our parish, and he had a trailer down there. And one day he said to me, "Sister, anytime we're not using it, you can have it." And he brought the keys over to the convent and he said, "Sister, this is the key of the front door and this is the key of the cabana." And then he held up a tiny little key and he said, "Sister, this is the key of the liquor cabinet. Help yourself." And I said, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow." I did. And I meant it. And I would say to the Nunny Bunnies regularly, pretty soon more than 50% of Southern California will be Hispanic. So what we need to do is get down there to Mexico as often as we can so that we can learn how to speak Spanish. And we would go down to Mexico and we would open up his liquor cabinet. Now, if any of you haven't finished drinking yet, and I hope to God you have, but if you haven't, don't ever drink with nuns. They're the most boring people to drink with. They say such things as, let's have these little glasses. And then they do a thing that I will never understand. They sip. And they hold out their little finger, and they're just so polite. And then they sip, and then they sip some more, and then they don't finish. They don't finish. And I never understand people who do that. I don't even understand it on airplanes, where I see people, ordering a drink, and then they'll take out their briefcase and start working, and the stewardess will come around and say, "You finished?" And they say, "Yeah, they're finished." And they've just had maybe 1 or 2 sips. I don't understand that. I'm a gulper. And they would always say little glasses, and I was interested in large containers, like flower pots, big. Anything that was big. So we would take ourselves down there to Mexico as often as we could get down there. Long weekends, short weekends, long holidays, short holidays. And we would drink. And I would drink, especially. And I knew that, you never were supposed to drink on the job. You were never supposed to drink in the middle of the night. Because if you did any of those things, that you would be an alcoholic. And that was the one thing that I was guarding against, because being Irish, it's in my generations, generations and generations. And I knew what alcoholism was. And I didn't want to be part of that scene, and I wanted to just be a nice, ladylike kind of drinker. I wanted to be a Vatican II sister who was liberated and who could drink. You know what I mean? Some of you might know what that meant. Just that I could just do the same as other people. And I was loving to do this kind of a life. And I was trying to do what the big book says that you cannot do. It says at some place in chapter 3 that the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is that somehow, someday, that she'll be able to control and enjoy her or his drinking. You'll be able to do the 2 things together. And what I discovered for me is that I could never do those 2 things together, because when I controlled my drinking, I could never enjoy it. You know what I mean? 2 this evening, or 3. I never enjoyed that. And when I enjoyed my drinking, I could never control it. And when I enjoyed my drinking, the sisters would say such things to me the next day, and they'd say, "Oh my, but you were something last night." And I was afraid, always afraid, to ask them what something was. I didn't know what I had done, you see, and I'd smile and say, "Oh yeah, we had a good time, didn't we?" And they'd kind of say, "Yeah, we did." And I would think, I wonder what I said. I wonder what I did. I wonder how I acted. Oh. And then the next day I would always be sick. I would always be sick. But it didn't stop me from drinking. And my drinking progressed and progressed, and I didn't like the way I was feeling. I knew never to drink on the job, because I knew that somebody would catch me. I knew never to drink and drive, because I knew somebody would catch me in those early years. And then one time I can remember thinking, I know what I'll do. I'll stop drinking. A very novel idea, I'll stop drinking. And so I decided to stop drinking. And I remember that year I stopped drinking on the 25th of April. And after a couple of weeks I was still shaking and sweating and crying, and I was, very upset. And I went to the doctor and I told him that I was having a nervous breakdown, I thought. And he said, "Yes, you probably are," when he listened to my lifestyle and the kinds of things I was doing, because I was one of these people who thought the harder I worked and the more I overcompensated for the way I felt, that the better off I would be. And anyway, I can remember him leaving, looking at me, and he said, "Oh, well, I'll give you something to calm you down." And so he gave me Elavil and Stelzine. I remember that. And then after a couple of weeks, he graduated me into another couple of things called Valium and Librium. And I had open prescriptions for these 4 drugs. And of course, being the nice, good nunny bunny that I was, it never dawned on him that I wouldn't know how to follow directions. And then finally, I knew that I was sipping these down or swallowing them down with a good shot of whatever I could get my hands on. But the drugs on their own didn't do anything for me, and I don't know why. In fact, they made me really feel out of it. I felt like the music on Twilight Zone, like, na 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 na, you know, woo. Really, I didn't like that because I like to be in control. I felt like the lights are on, but there's nobody home. That was the kind of a feeling I had. And so I remember getting rid of all the drugs, and I went home to Ireland for my home visit. And my mom, who liked to drink with me, she said, "What would you like to drink?" And I said, "Well, what do you have?" And she said, "Well, anything probably that you would like to have." And she poured me several drinks, and I was off and running again. But I knew that when I came back to California on the 1st of September, this is the 1st of September, I knew that I was going to stop drinking. But when I came back on the 1st of September, the Santa Ana wind was blowing, the kids were going to begin school any day again, and things seemed to be very tense and very pressured, and I knew I couldn't stop drinking just yet. I just knew I couldn't do it just yet. And so what I decided was to pray. I don't know if any of you tried to pray to stop drinking or to control and enjoy your drinking. It never dawned on me to stop drinking totally forever, just for a little while until I could kind of get myself back together again. Or maybe I would learn how to do the magic thing. So I remember I went up to the northern part of California and I made what was called a 30-day retreat, where I prayed hard and I fasted, and my big intention and all that praying I did was that somehow I'd be able just to not crave alcohol all night, and that I wouldn't be thinking about it, like, you know, the words of Willie Nelson's song, "You're always on my mind," you know. I was hoping that I'd somehow get a release from my mind from alcohol. And on about the middle of the retreat, about the 15th day, the priest who was giving us the retreat said, "Today you're going to have what's called a break day, and you're not going to do any of the retreat exercises and all." And the other people making the retreat said to me, "Is there any place you'd like to go today?" And I said, "Yes, I would like to visit the Napa Valley." And I thought there would be nothing more cultured, you know, and more with it, and more historical than for me to go and visit the Napa Valley and go and taste wine in all the wineries. And I did that and came home feeling, this huge head I had, and the next day I wanted to drink more than anything else in the world. But I knew, because in the way I used to pray those days would be, "God, if I give you this, I know you're going to give me that." I had this conditional kind of a prayer life, which I had for many, many years. And I just knew on day 30 that God was going to remove this for me, and I was going to be okay. And on day 30, I woke up and I wanted to drink more than anything else in the world, and I went back home and I did just that. And I always recall waking up at 2:12 in the morning when I got home, at 2:12, and wanting to drink and thinking, "Oh my God, you know, only alcoholics drink in the middle of the night. Maybe I should try to pray some more." And I remember going down to our little chapel there in the convent, and I was really, really angry with God. I had given my whole life to this God of my understanding then, to sort of give my life in dedication to the world, to teach children, and to talk about God everywhere I went. And something had gone wrong, and now I was wanting to drink. And I remember going into our little chapel, and I was so angry that I gave God the finger, like this. The eighth graders had taught me how to do that, so I knew. And I was very, very angry with God when I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I know lots of you aren't. I know that for a fact. But I was very angry. And I would get stomp, and I'd get, I'd pout, and I wouldn't pray, and I would get upset, and anybody who would say anything religious to me or holy, and I'd get on and off in tangents about this and that. I was really very upset. And I continue to do what the big book says that we continue to do. I continue to die. And in an audience this large, a number of us have experienced some kind of death before we got here. And Bill W. describes it awfully well, I think, on page 8 of the big book, where he says that no words can describe or can tell of the loneliness. No words can tell of the loneliness and the bitter morass of self-pity that he found himself in when alcohol had become his master, and he knew that he had been overwhelmed, and everywhere he stood he felt like he was putting his feet into quicksand, and he was sinking, and he had found his match, and he did not know what to do. And I'm always impressed when I see a large audience. And what I'd love to do, and I wouldn't be able to do this, but what I'd love to do is, I'd love to start here with Steve, and I look into Stephen's eyes and go all around this room and end up here with this other Stephen Healy here, and say to each of you, when did you die? Do you remember? Do you remember where you were? Were you in hospital? Were you in jail? Were you in your kitchen? Were you highly functioning, you thought, on your job? But where were you when you died? And there would be a variety of responses, you know. And Bill W. was standing there saying, no words can tell of the loneliness. And when I look at you, I think, you know, there's a variety of people here. There's a variety of ages. There's a variety of ethnic backgrounds. There's a variety of educational backgrounds. And the one thing that levels us all out here in this big audience today is this word called alcohol. And all the isms of the alcohol, the loneliness and the fear and the separateness of it. And the awful way we felt that we didn't fit in, and the craving and the urging and the self-loathing and the low self-esteem and the fear. God, the thing that levels us all out. And it doesn't matter then. It doesn't matter who we are, what we were, what we did, how much money we have, how much money we don't have. Nothing matters except that all of us have been leveled by this disease. When I came to that time where Bill W. talks about on page 8, I was standing in a very sheltered environment, in a convent, with beautiful people, many of whom are still there. There were kind people and prayerful people and caring people. And I was standing there, and I did not know what I was going to do. I did not know who I was going to tell this awful thing to, that I was dying. I was dying inside. My spirit was gone. I had no self-esteem. I was filled with self-hatred. And by the grace of God and a total miracle, I believe, I was standing in our living room. We call it the community room. And I was just leafing through a little pamphlet that's published every month for women religious, and it's called Sisters Today. And on the very back page there was an ad. And the ad said, "Sister, are you concerned about your drinking? If so, please call this number, collect." I consider that to be a miracle. First of all, that there was one other sister besides me, see, because I was so unique. In the 140,000 sisters in the United States, there must be somebody somewhere who has this problem like me. And the other miracle was that they said, call collect. See, that meant I wouldn't have to explain myself to anybody. And I was going to do this thing very professionally and very anonymously. And so I made a phone call the phone number was to Massachusetts. And I made this phone call, and I talked to a lady on the phone, and I told her that I was changing jobs, which was true. I was changing jobs from the job I had then, which was school principal, into the job I had until the 1st of July of this year, which was working with all the other nunny bunnies in the diocese and the priests and doing a lot of high-powered administration work there. And I told her I was very concerned because I was moving into this job, and a lot of the people with whom I would be working were drinking. And I didn't know how I was going to stop them drinking. And I didn't know anything about alcoholism, and how could she help me? And she told me about literature. In fact, she told me she would send me some. And she told me about the big book, and she told me about recovery programs, which that was, what I had just called. In fact, the place I had called was a recovery place for priests and nuns, and she said it was filled. And she said there are some bishops here too. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And she said, and all of the nuns that are here, they've all done big jobs before. Because I had impressed her about my degrees and my intelligence and all the responsibilities I had everywhere. And then she went on telling me about this, and then she said to me the most extraordinary question. She said, "Sister, would you like to tell me a little bit about your own drinking?" It was like a death sentence. I would never understand why they're so knowledgeable in Massachusetts, you know. I'm going back there in a couple of weeks from now, and I'm just dying to find out, you know. Just so knowledgeable. And she said to me, what we get to know and get to understand, the miracle of this program about one drunk helping another drunk, you know, the miracle is that she said to me, because I can hear pain in your voice. We get to hear the pain in one another's voices, and we get to see the pain in one another's faces. And because we get to do that, we're then able to begin the healing process with one another, which is what all of this is about. So touching, so marvelous. There's nothing like this any place else that I know of. And so, by the grace of God, I was able to break down and cry into the telephone to this strange voice. And I told her that I did not know what to do, I did not know where to go, and I would not be able to break off my regular job and go to a recovery hospital, etc., etc. And she said to me, well, maybe you should try some AA meetings. Maybe, maybe you don't have to go all the way down to the very bottom, because she said it's kind of like those streetcars in San Francisco, those trolley cars. You can get off anywhere you want. But she said, you know what, it sounds to me like you have no place to go but down. So the following day I called a place called Serenity Hall in Whittier, which was quite a distance from where I lived, because I was at that time extremely important, extremely knowledgeable, very well known, and I didn't want anybody in the area in Orange County to know me or to see me. And so I went down to this place called Serenity Hall in what was called Uptown Whittier. Well, uptown meant downtown, you know, it was that kind of a place. And so I went into Serenity Hall in Whittier, and I remember exactly what I did. I changed from my nunny clothes, that we were wearing nunny clothes at the time, into regular clothes, and I put on a whole bunch of eye makeup. I can always remember doing that. And I went into Serenity Hall in Whittier on a Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. And what I recall was that there were a lot of little old men, and they were all shuffling all over Serenity Hall. That's what I thought. Just little old men shuffling all over there. And there were two women, and one woman left. And the other one was what we say in Ireland, she wasn't the full shilling. Or as they told me in Chicago last year, 2 sandwiches short of a picnic. She would, she'd clap at the wrong places, and she'd say things out loud, and she'd talk to herself, and she'd laugh and giggle, and she'd get up and walk around, and she'd thump people on the back, and she was so weird. And then there was a man got up to share from the podium, and he was sharing his experience, strength, and hope with us. And he said, the first thing he said was that he would sign court cards after the meeting. And I wasn't sure exactly what that meant. I knew that I would have to probably go out and get a court card so that I could belong to there if I intended to return, which I didn't intend to do. But anyway, he went on sharing with us, and he told us about his life and what had happened to him and how he'd been to jail, and horrendous things had happened to this fellow. And he was fascinating to me. He was fascinating. He was using words that I used to punish the 8th graders for writing on the bathroom walls. He was using a word regularly that began with sh. saying it all the time. And then he graduated into another word that he said even more frequently, and it began with "f." And what was interesting to me was that he could use the "f" word in sentences. And he could use it in different parts of speech, like noun, verb, adjective, preposition, conjunction. Really, quick. And, he could even use the "f" word with ing on the end and ed on the end. And on one occasion, he used it with the word mother before it. And I remember looking at him and thinking, and this is going to be my spiritual leader for the rest of my life. And he finished up his talk by saying, "Keep coming back, it works." Oh, I will never forget that first meeting. I will never forget it as long as I live. And I knew I'd never go back to Alcoholics Anonymous for sure. And I got in my car to drive home, and I didn't want to be an alcoholic, and I didn't want to be there, and I didn't want anything to do with this thing that we're talking about. And they gave me this book, And I remember I was crying really hard on the way home, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I could see this eye makeup, pouring down my face. And I remember what I did was I said the "sh" word and the "f" word all the way home to the convent. The mental release of all kinds of anger that I had. And in my world today, I have to be really careful. I have to be very careful. In the circles in which I move during the week, I have to watch out. And I can remember thinking, what am I going to do? And I went back to Serenity Hall again, reluctantly, and then I found other meetings. But they were basically telling me 5 things at meetings that I did not care to hear. They were saying, don't drink. Now, if you're new, and we say it all the time in AA, to be told don't drink is really horrendous for us, because we're thinking, how are we ever not going to not drink? That's really awfully basic. We just don't think we're ever going to be able to stop drinking. Or at least that we'd be able to have it sometime again, even if we stopped it periodically. Well, that was awfully scary to me. They were saying, don't drink and don't use any kind of mind-altering drugs. They were saying that sort of thing, too. And then they were saying, go to meetings. Well, when they were saying go to meetings, that was really offensive to me, because I have a drawer in my room, and it's the bottom drawer full of pieces of paper. They're called degrees. And I have this other Irish disease. It's called arrogance. I know none of you probably suffers from that, but I have that, a little bit of that, and it's a bit of a nuisance to me, because that means that I know a little bit better than anybody else, and God help you if you try to tell me. And so they were saying, go to meetings, and I didn't think there would be anything at these meetings that would enhance what I already knew, or what I would be able to find out myself without meeting people like you. I really believe that. And then they were saying things like, read the book. And what I did was, I took the book and I read it, and I found that I didn't like the way it was written, because the syntax, of the sentences offended me, offended my sensibility. I was an English major in the University of London, and I didn't care for the way it was written. So I took it down to the beach one day and I corrected it. And all ready for you. And I took it down to Serenity Hall and I told them this. It's so embarrassing to me when I have to tell you about stuff I did. And I corrected it and I told them about it, and they just smiled at me and they said, keep coming back, Bea. And they were very kind, very gentle. And then they told me I had to get a sponsor. I'd always like to comment on this because, again, the word getting a sponsor was horrendous to me because I didn't trust anybody. I wasn't a truster. And when they would say get a sponsor, and they were telling me that I had to work the steps. And they were talking about the theme of your conference here called a design. So, this program will give you design for living. I thought, I don't need a design for living. I just don't want to wake up in the morning, and I don't want to wake up in the middle of the night and want to be drinking, and I don't want to drink and make a fool out of myself, and I don't want to be thinking about drinking all the time. I don't want a design for living because I have one. See, I have one. Oh, it's a miracle. I get very emotional when I tell you this because it's a total miracle that I was able to catch on to this. In fact, last night at dinner, Clancy and I was saying to Clancy, I presume that he knows loads of secrets. And I said, Clancy, tell me the secret. How is it that there are lots of people who don't seem to get this thing? And I was one of these people who almost didn't get it. And he went on to tell me that he believed that it had something, a lot to do with the willingness to surrender, to become subordinated, to do some things some other way from the way that I thought they should be done. Now, I'm not that kind of a person. Really, I'm not. Because if you tell me to follow directions anywhere, even when I'm driving on the street and it says, right-hand lane must turn right, my immediate response is, who said? And I come into a program from the north of Ireland, basically, where we write on our wall for our graffiti is no surrender. I fight everything to the very death. That's in my bones, it's in my blood. And I come into you and you tell me I have to surrender. And I'm dying in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have to tell you this because it's my truth, Some of you came in and you just knew, like some of the people that I know, people I sponsor today, and the minute they came in, they knew they were home. Not me, not this little red hen, not me. I was not home. I fought this program with every ounce of strength, and I've got a lot of fight in me. I fought this with everything that I had. And the only thing I didn't do was I didn't drink. And I white-knuckled it, and I white-knuckled it, and I was going to show you, and I was not going to do the steps, and I was not going to write an inventory, and I was not going to take a step 3. Because on this ring that I wear in my finger, I'd given my whole life to God. I dedicated my entire life to God. On the inside of my ring it says, my God and my all. So I thought I'd done a third step way back when. I had no idea that it never dawned on me to hand my will over to God. That never occurred to me. I used to give lectures on God's will, on discerning God's will across the country. I think of it, I need a lot of... I'm really ashamed and embarrassed about the things I used to say and thought I knew. I used to give lectures on humility. Oh, God. I can hardly tell you that without dying, Awful stuff, and I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Anyway, I was dying in Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's one person maybe in this audience today who might be dying in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was dying in Alcoholics Anonymous, not drinking, but dying. My spirit was dying. I was crying all the time. I didn't want to do anything I was told. I didn't want to surrender. I didn't want to follow directions. I went down to Serenity Hall one morning, and I was crying again, as usual. In fact, they always called me the crying nun. And this older member of AA, who has since passed on, he just kind of was real fatherly to me. And he said to me, Bea, he said, you're always upset and you're always miserable. And this program is supposed to help you to become happy, joyous, and free. And I looked at him like, well, you could have told me. I didn't get that part, And he said, you know what? I'll tell you something that might work for you. And he was so kind and he was so gentle. And he said, why don't you do this? And I was listening real hard because by then I would do anything that would stop the pain that was inside of me. And he said, why don't you go home and kneel on your knees and ask God to give you the willingness to change your attitude. I was so dying that I went home to my home convent and I did that. I knelt on my knees and I said, God, could you give me the willingness to change my attitude? And I would love to tell you, because I like to be dramatic, that there were angels in the sky and that there was a burning bush and all, it was really flurry and God was there. But I'm here to tell you a couple of things that happened to me. A few days after that event, I was driving on the 57 freeway in deep traffic, which I hated to do, and I looked in the mirror again in the car and I saw the sunset. And I had never seen anything so perfect and so beautiful in my entire life. I had never seen sunsets. I had never heard birds singing. I'd never seen smiles on faces. I was totally preoccupied with this thing called alcohol. And it occurred to me as I looked at that sunset that I hadn't thought of drinking for several days. And I knew for sure that the merciless obsession had been lifted from me. What I found out about praying for willingness is that God is extremely stingy with willingness. He only does Sunday, September 1st, 1991, now. That's all. He won't do tomorrow before tomorrow. He won't do next Christmas Day or the 26th of December. He won't do anything until the day. And it seems to me that when I ask for the willingness for a given day, I get the willingness for that, whatever it is that I have to do. Extremely stingy. But what I've also found out is that any time that I get stuck in my program, now you're all unstuck, I know that for sure, looking at you from here. I know for sure that Johnny A. is always unstuck. But I know that I get stuck in my sobriety. And that means that I get in between surrenders when I don't want to do this next thing that I'm supposed to do. I don't want to give up this other thing, this other little piece of my own will that keeps on getting revealed to me, These layers of myself that I still have to dig into, There's always pieces and more pieces that I get to know about me. This is a tremendous journey. I thought I knew this stuff, you see. I thought I did. But I'm getting to know more and more and more. All the time there's more and more being revealed to me. Fascinating. Fascinating. And if it weren't, I wouldn't be here. I have never lost interest in this adventure. It's just unbelievable. I'm awfully enthusiastic. I don't know where it'll get me to. It's just unbelievable. I've never found anything like this in my whole life, and God knows I searched. I searched and searched. And so I prayed for the willingness. And so I pray for the willingness. And it seems to me that things all started to turn around, and then what it was, I got to know what this thing was about. I got to know that, guess what, B? You're powerless. You are powerless. You're powerless over alcohol, drugs, people, places, and things, people's reactions. You're powerless over the whole deal now. And lack of power is your dilemma, and when you get into a dilemma, it's because you're wanting to take the power over again, B. And B, guess what? You get to know that God can restore you to sanity at any given moment. Now, I tend to get insane occasionally. I do airports and, having to wait in line and big things like that, driving in traffic. I get insanity can creep in. I can wake up insanity is sitting on the bottom of the bed, usually in a form of resentment, trying to get me. Say, wake up, B, come on, we've got to do them today now. We've got to get them. Go for it, I read the other day, I don't know if I can remember this, but I read the other day the Irish resentment. May those who love us, and may those who don't love us, may God turn their hearts. And if He doesn't turn their hearts, may He turn their ankles, so we know them by their limping. I can wake up doing that at 3 o'clock in the morning, folks. Today I can even do that. I didn't do it this morning, but I can do that. And what I learned I learned that on page 62 it says, at the very top of the page it says, in fact, it's interesting to me, one of the other things I do in my life now is I give retreats in the program, and the last retreat I gave last weekend was, if the rest of the word would only behave. That's a direct quote from the top of page 62. And it goes on to talk about the 13 times and the ways of selfishness and self-centeredness and how this can get me, how it can encase me. And then in the bottom paragraph it says, B, honey, listen, this is the how and the why that you have to quit playing God because it doesn't work. And hereafter in this drama of life, God is going to be your director. He is the principal and you are his agent. He is the father and you are his child. And B, most good ideas are simple. They're so simple that you might not even get it. But this concept that God's in charge is the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which you, B, are going to pass to freedom. And then what I found fascinating, I found this very interesting altogether, was that where it mentions on page 62 13 references to selfishness and self-centeredness, as a result of doing step 3, it gives 13 promises. It says, B, when you sincerely take this position of turning your will and your life over to the care of a higher power, when you sincerely do this thing, all sorts of remarkable things are going to follow you. You're going to have a new employer. And he's going to provide everything you need if you stay close to him and perform his work well. And guess what, B? You, who's so encased in the bondage of yourself, you're going to become less and less interested in yourself and in your little plans and designs, and you're going to become more and more interested in what you can give out there. You're going to look into people's eyes and you're going to want to give. B, that's a miracle for me. And you're going to become conscious of God's presence, B. And you're going to discover yourself that you can face life successfully. Now, they knew about me being able to face life successfully. Did you ever hear them saying to you, you're not living or working up to your potential, whatever that's supposed to mean, I'm never sure. But the book promises us on step 3, there on page 63, it says, we'll be able to discover that we can face life successfully ourselves. We know this ourselves. They knew about us, but we didn't. And that means that we get this self-esteem thing. Self-esteem always reminds me of soap bubbles. You blow them and they're gorgeous and they're all over the place and then they disappear. They just go away. It promises me on page 63 that I lose my fear, the groundless, nameless, 100 forms of fear. My fear of today and tomorrow and the hereafter. And it's somebody like me who thinks that I have it all wrapped up, that I'll become like a little newborn baby. And I'll be able to be teachable, and I'll be reborn. What a miracle. What a miracle, this program. What was fascinating to me, too, was that I found 84 of those kinds of promises, all caught in there in the steps. I found 6 in step 4, and I found 10 in step 5, and I found, of course, our 12 that we talk about in steps 8 and 9, and I found 10 promises in step 10. And I found 6 or 7 in step 11, and I found 25 in step 12. Wonderful. And so I found 84 promises altogether in the big book, all couched in, hidden there among the steps. I would like to tell you how I found God. I thought I had found God before, I thought I'd done all this God stuff, and I'd read the Bible, and I'd studied, and I'd gone to seminars, and I'd made retreats, and I'd prayed for years. God help me, I prayed. I didn't know how to pray until I found you, And what happened for me was that when I was taking step 7 from page 76 of our big book, and for a release, it's a great recipe for anybody who's still caught and doesn't know how to pray or doesn't know anything about God or hasn't found this wonderful God that I have found. And when I was praying, and I'd done my 1 through 6, I'd done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I became willing to have God remove my defects of character, and then it says we humbly asked Him to remove them. And I knelt on my knees and I said, my Creator, what it says on page 76, my Creator, I am now willing, that's a big thing for me to say, I am now willing that you God my Father, should have all of me, good and bad. Now, I don't know where he come from. I'm Irish Catholic. And if you're Irish Catholic, there's always this hidden little thing that says somehow you have to be good for God. Somehow you have to perform well so that God will love you. You have to do some of this conditional kind of stuff. And there's really no inner understanding, no internal knowledge that God would love you anyhow, for me. And when I said, my Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad, my God appeared to me for the very first time, and I had my very, very, very first spiritual awakening. And this is what happened. In my innermost self, I felt that I knew that God was my Father. I had grown up without a daddy, and I needed a father so bad. And this daddy God said to me, "Be," he was big, by the way, big and Irish, big Irish God. And he had his arms out and he was saying, I saw this in my mind, and he said, "B," he was laughing. He said, "B, are you sure? Are you sure that it's okay for you to come to me whether you're good or bad? Whether you're right or wrong, whether you're true or false? Are you willing to come to me just as you are, with your freckles, your red hair, your needing to be on top, your wanting to be right, your wanting to win, with all your ambitions, with all your everything there is about me? Are you willing to come to me just as you are?" And I guess I said, "Yes, Father, I am willing now." Because my God said to me, "You know, B, I just love you anyway, because you're my kid. You're my kid. And I couldn't love you any more no matter what you do." And I understood for the very first time what it was to be a child of God. And then I knew what I'd been trying to teach hundreds of people for years before that. I'd been trying to teach people, that God loved them. In fact, I used to tell them quotations from the Bible, and I would say to them, your God loves you so much that he would carve your name on the palm of his hand. He loves you so much that he would do that. Or your God loves you so much that he would call you, he would know you, he would call you by your very own name. And he would look down and he would call you Karen and Mary and Johnny and Clancy. He'd say all our names, He'd love us so much that we'd be so precious. And I would say to people, your God loves you so much that he would even understand your agitation. I found this in one of the Psalms one time. He would understand all your agitation. He would note that, and he would see you crying, and he would store up your tears, and he would hold them in a little bottle. You would be so precious to God. And I used to tell people that. But when I took step 7, I knew that for me. I knew that I was this precious to God, that God would store up my tears and he would put them into a little bottle. And nothing has ever been the same since. Nothing. Nothing. It's been a wonderful experience. I've told you what it used to be like for me and what happened, and I'm going to tell you really briefly what it's like for me now. I just got back from Ireland not very many days ago now, and I spent the summer doing some work for my community, and I got to go to AA meetings every single night in Dublin. It was wonderful. In fact, there were 3 AA meetings within walking distance of where I was staying, so God always provides for me no matter where I go. But what happened for me, and I want to tell you this because every time I talk about it I get a little bit more healing. What happened for me was that my very good friend Vicky, who lived in my community where I live in Brea, she was also over there on vacation, and she had gone over to England to visit her sister, and she had a massive heart attack and she died very suddenly. And I was responsible in Ireland for having to get her body from England to Ireland, and I was responsible for arranging her funeral in Dublin, of which she was a native, and it was miraculous that she was there to die. But I want to let you know that my heart is broken without her. She was like an old shoe kind of friend who was much older than I was, but had known me for a long, long time, and was so supportive in my alcoholism. And she made sure that I got to meetings, and she was like a real, real good friend. And what I know is that, and I share this with those of you who might be going through some kind of trauma right now, is that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous can get us through anything at any time. When I got back to the United States after having her funeral back there, and I came back, and I was responsible for the last several days of going through her stuff. Now, for those of you who might be rat packs out there, please get rid of it when you go home this weekend. Because Vicky was a rat pack, and so she gathered things around her, and so I've been going through her stuff. And it's been real painful for me, real painful. And I have to be doing grieving a little bit, and I think I'm over it, and then I don't. I start crying again. I miss her. I miss her when I go home this evening, because she'll want to sit down in our kitchen and have a cup of tea with me and know all about you. That's what I would do every Sunday when I would get home. And Vicky won't be there. And so I'm sad. But I share that with you because we can do sadness and grief, and we can do separation, and we can do losses, and we can do changes of jobs. That's something else I did in the last couple of months. I changed my high-powered, prestigious job from working in the diocese to turning my will and my life entirely over to people like you. That was scary. I knew I had to do this. I knew I could no longer, I had been doing the other job for 12 years, and I knew that I needed to do this. And as soon as I did it, as soon as I put in my letter, I knew that it was the right thing. But then it felt like I was jumping from a 13-story building to move into this kind of thing all the time. And while I know it's right, and God continues to tell me, I just have to live with this loose grasp on life and knowing that God is going to be in charge. As I work the maintenance steps, which gives us the design for living, I know that I can't ever afford to get into selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, or fear. And I know that if I do my step 10, that I will cease fighting everything and everybody. That's what it promises me. And I know that I'll be placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. And I know if I stay close and in conscious contact with the higher power, and I try to realize this dream that I have a dream, like many of you have dreams, and one of the dreams that I have now is that I'm going to build an 11-step house in Orange County so that people can get off the freeway and breathe and do conscious contact with God. And to the degree that I get into this, this praying and meditation and holding on to this higher power, I know that I could get emotional sobriety. I'm looking for this classy stuff. You see all kinds of sobriety. You see like the low-life kind where people get into relationships and stay there and don't move on in the program. And then you get the ho-hum kind where people get bored in the program. And then you get the real classy thing where people get really excited about this thing called sobriety. And those are the people I follow. Those are the people I'm after. And that's the kind of sobriety I'm looking for, where I'm not ready to kill every minute of every day, and I'm not ready to fight everything and everybody all the time, and that I'm found peace of soul and peace of mind. I don't know how step 12 works, but I know that as Clancy and I decided on last night, that God ripples through these rooms in ways that we have no idea. We have no idea at all how it works. We just don't understand this. But we know that it does. And it has worked very powerfully through the people who have set up this wonderful conference, through all the work you did, through all the various details that had to be done. And through those of us who go back to our own home groups and we do the things that we have to do, we get to share this message and we get to carry it in various kinds of ways. I would never know, exactly how it works, but I do know this. I was sponsoring this person a few years ago, and she was a very educated woman, and she just didn't know all the answers, and she was very enthused about the program, but she wouldn't stop drinking. And she kept saying to me, but I will do the steps, and I'll go to step studies, and I'll write my inventory, but I will have to have a little glass of wine every night. And she wouldn't stop drinking. And I would say to her, Nancy, you do have to stop drinking in between meetings. And she would say, but I won't be stopping drinking. And one morning we went to the Pomona Valley Hospital, early morning meeting, and this fool stood up. You know how sometimes that can happen. A fool stood up and he talked about his experience, strength, and hope. And at the very end, he finished his pitch by the way he always finishes it. And he said, and if you don't drink between meetings or use any mind-altering drugs, this program will work for you. It'll work best for you. And she got into the car and she held me by the two hands and she said, Bea, you know what? Peter said we can't drink. I've been telling her this. I've been telling her this for 6 whole months and she never heard it. See, we don't know. And that's why we can never afford to criticize. As it says in our big book, we never criticize. We never do this. Because we don't know. And the foolish people that we think are, going off and saying things over and over again, there's somebody somewhere over there is hearing it for the very first time. And that's how my Father works. That's how my God works. I want to affirm you for getting this together and for being the recovering people that you are. Thanks be to God. And I want to tell you that I love you and that I receive your love. I know it's there. And I want to ask God to bless you and your families. And I hope that you will never find it necessary to drink or use again, and that you'll catch on to this classy stuff that is here for all of us. May God bless you and thank you.